Well, there's a kind of a lively discussion going on in week two, um, usually very relevant to what's going on in the difference between Downey and Sieghart. This person said, with altruism replaced with currency, then everyone is racing to provide the best product for the cheapest price to beat the competition and help the society while still remaining selfish. It's just classic Adam Smith, right? The invisible hand. Very powerful idea, very brilliant idea in Western social thought, in economics. Smith's idea, which has some precedence in earlier thinking, but Smith is the one who really gave its classical formulation. The idea that the society does not need rules and regulations to maximize the public good. That in a free market, the public good is maximized by everyone pursuing his or her own self-interest, by acting selfishly. The idea is that by trying to do the best for yourself, you have to trade with others, and by producing things to trade with others, you're actually serving their needs, even though you don't have that in mind. You have only your own profit in mind, but you are led as if by an invisible hand to serve the interests of others and to contribute to the public good. A very powerful idea in Western history, and one which has a lot going for it. This person was really advocating that really the professions don't need this kind of regulation and this kind of ethical guidance. That I suppose the idea is that like everyone else, professionals will be led to provide good services to others simply by pursuing their own selfish interests. And they may be right. The question is that whether there are some areas of life in which the free market doesn't do the best job in delivering services. Certainly the big in America, forever, the biggest controversy has been over delivering healthcare. We are the only major rich industrialized nation that doesn't have a national health service. And the argument is that doctors should be free to provide services to whomever they choose. There's a lot going to that argument. Others would counter that this actually results in all sorts of inefficiencies, inequities, that in certain areas of life, something like even a regulated monopoly, like in the delivery of utilities, is needed. I mean, for instance, something like we're talking about professions. The idea that profession really relies upon the idea that what professionals do is really unique and so vital to the welfare of the human being that it cannot be left to the free market. Now, that may be a bad argument, but that's the argument. And if we think about things like, say, delivering water, should water services be a for-profit thing? That's, well, I mean, nobody does it that way. And there's a reason that nobody does it that way, because you need water to live. And if you can't pay your bill, you still should be able to live and wash and be able to cook and clean your dishes and things like that. Not that water is free. It certainly isn't in the city of Philadelphia. I pay a water bill, rather large water bill every month. But that is a broader discussion, but certainly very relevant to what's going on. I think Downey would agree, not that he's necessarily advocating for a totally free market, but he certainly doesn't think that we need doctors and lawyers and engineers to be held to different rules than anyone else in business to come out with a good outcome. Like, what is a profession? Okay, this person said, okay, if you can make money for doing it, you are a professional, and it is your profession. It seems like semantics to try and retcon that into something more specialized. Are you a comic book fan? Retcon, isn't that like a Marvel DC universe? Things get retconned. Yeah, it's pretty cheesy when they do it to Daredevil or the Hulk or Iron Man. Yes, I'm more of a Marvel guy. Well, that's interesting. If you can make money for doing it, you're professional and it's your profession. Well, sure, you can think of it that way. There's nothing wrong with it. And there is that rooted sense in the language, I'm sure I discussed in the videos, in which we say a professional is someone who gets paid for doing it. There's nothing wrong with that. But I guess the real thing is whether there are really professions. And if you really think that there are professions, you have to believe that there is something again, unique about what the doctor does, what the lawyer does, what the military person does, what the priest or minister or rabbi does, and perhaps even the engineer, that sets it apart. If you don't believe that, that's fine. You don't have to believe that. But there are some reasons for thinking historically, why did these things develop? Where certain things got called professions and other things didn't. Historically, it's a very complicated story. Even researching the word profession is a difficult matter. The word doesn't appear, really, if my memory serves, until the 1800s. But there's a long history of thinking that certain things, like the care of your soul as a priest, the care of your body as a doctor, the care of your freedom and property as a lawyer, that sets these things off. And it's more than just doing it for a living. There's an element of service. I mean, that's really the element, is that there's an element that has to be a public service. And that's, of course, is related to altruism. And that's the root of it. And again, there are good reasons for thinking that it's true, but there are good reasons for thinking that maybe it's a mistake. So I'm not trying to decide the matter. I love that retcon thing, though. Very frustrating when things get retconned. I believe that Sieghart is looking at the world from a very idealistic point of view. He is. Of course he is. I think he knows he is. To even say professions are the conscience of society is a little bit dramatic. But I think he really is trying to lay out an ideal case. He doesn't expect that all professionals will abide by the rule of altruism. He surely knows that that's not true. But laying out ideals is a good thing. I mean, if we can decide what the world should be like, even if it's not the way the world is like, if we can decide how we should behave, even if we know that it's not exactly how we will behave, that's a good thing to do. It's a good thing to do. So laying out what our values are, even if we know that we'll, to a certain degree, fail in living up to them, is not a useless enterprise. But I would say, yeah, he's idealistic. Yes, he is. Now we're into week 3, the NSPE cases. Professor Tui's comment on how the NSPE Board of Ethical Review takes a much stronger stance on ethical breaches against a client or employer than they do on ethical breaches against the general public. Of course, this is taken out of context, but I wanted to clarify that. I'm sure that I did say that. I'm sure I did. I'm sure this is absolutely correct, what I said. And I think that to a certain extent it's true. It's not that the NSPE doesn't take seriously the first canon. They do. But those NSPE cases are interpretations of the canons applied to specific cases, okay? So all sorts of decisions need to be made along the way about how to apply those general principles to specific situations. And I think it's true. I would stand by it, having read, I think I've read more NSPE cases than anybody who's not on the NSPE Board of Ethical Review. So I feel somewhat entitled to make these kind of sweeping pronouncements, even if they're questionable. That they are very conservative when it comes to taking engineers to task for violations of the first canon, especially, the duty sometimes to blow the whistle. They're very, very reluctant to almost ever say that engineers need to do something about a violation of the first canon, whereas it seems to me that they are much quicker to point out and to castigate engineers for violation of the fourth canon. That is just simply an observation. Yes, it's personally frustrating to me sometimes. Some of those decisions I think are wrong, but that's bound to happen. I mean, the NSPE Board of Ethical Review is a very, very reliable thing. They're always going to be thoughtful. It would be ridiculous to say that they're always right or that you're always going to agree with them. But if I do sometimes disagree with them strongly, it's in what I see as sometimes, perhaps, a bias against the first canon and toward. But that's really for you to think as you read these cases. Thinking about these two cases, the one having to do with returning messages, the other having to do with getting a trip. Before becoming familiar with the ethics of the engineering discipline, I would have not expected either case to be a violation of professional or ethical standards. In fact, even after becoming familiar with the relevant canons of the Engineering Code of Ethics, I think deeming the actions of the engineer who failed to return phone calls and emails of a client was inconsistent with the Code of Ethics. That is, deeming